I'm going to talk a little bit more about the short story, the long short story, An Act of Oblivion by David Helwig. Now, this is a complicated story because it is a turgid read. It is very, very dense, and it's one of those short stories that deliberately throws in a lot of detail that tries to be the equivalent of a novel in terms of its sort of emotional range, the complexity and the denseness of its plot. But unfortunately, there are very few scenes that come alive in this story. It's a classic example of a writer not following the creative writing workshop rule of thumb that you should show, not tell. There's almost the entire story by Helwig is telling. Now, the narrator of the story, who is kind of anonymous, has two ex wives, Leah, who we meet at the beginning, and Brenda, his first wife. And it is Brenda that the story ultimately focuses on, and it is a drama between the narrator, the protagonist, and Brenda that really makes the story come alive near the end. Brenda is the daughter of basically a sort of con man type of guy, and she's got a brother who's even more of a con man, a handsome sociopath, according to the narrator. And Brenda herself is very, very highly sexed. She likes to do it everywhere. And in the story, most of the sexual scenes are ones initiated by Brenda. Um, and The narrator himself is sort of a typical guy. He's pretty horny. Uh, but a lot of his relationships with women, his sexual relationships with women, seem marred by either his shyness or his lack of lovemaking skill, his lack of charm. He does manage to sleep with several women in the story, but one senses an underlying insecurity, and that might also be driving his uh, continued relationship with Brenda. He's warned by his friends to avoid Brenda very early on before they get married. They get married anyway. They drink a great deal. Brenda is alcoholic, and the narrator claims that he himself is not alcoholic, but he drinks with her heavily. And Then finally, what happens near the end of the story is he finds out when his own mother is dying that his father-in-law and brother-in-law have been siphoning money from the family savings by using a kind of blackmail against the narrator's own father, claiming that they will interfere in the marriage of Brenda and the narrator unless the narrator's father coughs up money for these different quote unquote investments that they're making. The narrator is furious, and at that point, because he decides that Brenda is in cahoots with this conning by his brother-in-law and father-in-law, he decides to kill Brenda, and he gets a gun, and he's quite dead serious about going to her place and killing her. And the only thing that stops him is he ends up having a car accident just before he arrives there. It's not his fault. Somebody basically pulls out into the street too fast and uh, rams into his car. He gets a bit of a concussion, and he shakes off the dizziness, and he gets to Brenda's. He puts the gun away at the last minute. He decides he's just going to talk to her. But through the story, one gets hints about Brenda herself. Some of these hints the narrator picks up on. And the narrator does have a bit of a spine. At one point, when he figures out that his brother in law is a con man, he contacts the police and basically has his brother in law put away for quite a bit of time in a penitentiary. So he is willing to act and willing to, able to perceive sort of this underlying reality. But other hints don't really sort of register with him. For example, Brenda at one point says, I'm just such a good little, they say I'm such a good little, rhymes with Bloor. And this is sort of connected with her extreme high level of sexuality. Uh, but the narrator never really figures out that maybe Brenda herself is a victim, an abuse victim of her own father and brother. Um, and in that sense, Brenda is on the one hand is a troublemaker for the narrator. On the other hand, she does deserve pity. And the idea of killing her in cold blood because of anger over this years long process of getting ripped off and the family getting conned, of the narrator's father getting conned. Killing Brenda in retribution is a crazy idea, and the story never really resolves the narrator's willingness to do this. I mean, on the one hand, we can understand his fury. We can understand an impulse, an anger, a momentary impulse to get revenge, to even kill. But at the same time, it's not the sort of thing a normal person really tries to organize. The narrator goes out to the black market and he buys a handgun in, like early 1960s Toronto. That's a bit of an accomplishment. He is dead serious about what he wants to do. So the story has kind of loose ends that are never psychological loose ends that are never fully resolved. It's not particularly well written. It's not propulsive in any way. It has a lot of unnecessary detail. There are a lot of digressions about characters such as Philip Lay, and they're not really necessary to the main story. So it's clumsy overall, but it does have a certain kind of power at the end, and it's interesting.